Hey everyone, I'm Alan Robinson, and you're watching The Guitar Doctor is In. So welcome to episode 4 of The Guitar Doctor is In, and tonight we're going to talk about my process for building chords or teaching chords to students who want to aspire to have a larger chord vocabulary. Maybe not having great experience with many chords past power chords. So I developed this method by working with a lot of young rock players many years ago, and it turned into, well, this book, which I call the Harmonic expansion process. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give kind of a brief blow by blow on the process, or at least a portion of it, and we'll see what you think. All right, so here we go. This process was derived from using basic materials that most guitarists start off playing, such as power chords and pentatonic scales. And so when you look at a power chord, if I played C5, standard rock chord, right? If I play that, there's only two ways to play a power chord on a string set. I've either got this, what I will refer to as the root position power chord, or it's one and only inversion. So if we take the notes C and G and we invert them on the same string set, we'd have G on the lower string and C on the upper string, or maybe I play it on strings 3 and 4. Either which case, that's the only two ways you could play the power chord, like this or this. What we're going to do is use these differently than we would normally think about doing in a rock situation, where maybe that's the root of the chord, like the chord calls for C5, and that's what we play. In this case, we're going to look at those two notes in the power chord as being the 3rd and the 7th of a 7th chord formation. So if you were to look at a 7th chord, I'll take a real simple one like C major 7, and we were to stack it from the bottom to the top, C, E, G, and B. What you would have involved in there are 2/5, one from the root to the 5th, which is C5, and then one from the 3rd, E, to B, the 7th, which is an E5. So if I'm looking at it from this perspective of fifths, there's two power chords involved, and the 3rd and the 7th make up one of those power chords. I'm going to place my power chords on string set 3 and 4, so they're in the middle of the guitar, because I plan on using strings 1 and 2 later on for upper parts of this chord. And when I look at this when I look at a C5, for example, on string set 3 and 4, what I'll find is the lowest one I can achieve here is that inverted C5, and then I can find the root position at the 10th fret. Now what I want to do is I want to find the root associated with that. In this case, I'm looking at A minor 7. So if the root is on the 5th string, like at the 12th fret, compared to that power chord, you'll see that we have 3 adjacent strings. So anytime the root is on the 5th string, or on the set of 3 adjacent strings, I got to make that clear because there's other places to move this. Then the power chord shape is going to be the root form of the power chord, like in this case. If the root has a string skipped between it, like if I place the root A on the 6th string, and now it's above my power chord in the inverted form, okay, that shape will always be consistent. Again, I could be moving this someplace else. If I wanted a D minor, I might skip a string, and then I'm going to have a power chord utilizing the B string, and it looks a little different just because the B string is tuned up a half, or in a 3rd instead of a 4th, and so you have to move the fret up 1 fret. But it's still the same shape in itself. So there's A minor there. I could have done A minor from the 6th string this way, and it's still 3 adjacent strings. So there's the biggest difference in finding the root and applying it to the proper shape. Either it's inverted form or it's root form. 3 adjacent strings is the root form. Skipping a string between, it's going to be in its inverted form. So that's a very important element to remember when we're doing this process. So that addresses a minor 7 chord and the usage of the power chord in the relationship to the root. But we also need to be concerned with major 7s and dominant 7s, because ultimately we're going to talk about creating a 2-5-1, which would be a very common chord progression in jazz music. So as I look at this, if I look at that relationship of the minor chord, like I said, with the 3 adjacent strings, and if my root is on the 5th string, and to locate the power chord, just go down 3 frets and up a string. If that is a minor 7, in order to get the major 7, I simply need to take that flat 3 and that flat 7 of the minor chord, move it up a half step, which now makes it a major 3rd and a major 7th, apply the same root, and that's a major 7 shape with that power chord. Notice it's still in root position power chord form because the root is still on an adjacent string. If I were to do the same concept from the inverted form of A minor 7, then all I should have to do is take that inverted power chord form, move it up a half step, place the root back with it, and sure enough, I've got a major 7 voicing now with the skip string in between. Okay, so now the process has just been shifted by 1 fret up for each of those to get a major 7. There's one more form that we need to deal with, and that is the dominant chord. The dominant 7th chord is a major chord, but has a flat 7. So again, if I go back to this major shape that we just created, I have a major 3rd and a major 7th involved right now. So all I need to do is lower that 7th, and now I have a dominant chord. Same thing here. And the 7th now is on the lower of the 2 strings, so that'll be the note I lower. So I get a new shape. I get this angular shape, which we'll call a tritone, or in this case, I'll refer to it frequently as a diminished power chord because it's got a lowered 5th, so it's that kind of shape. I'm sorry, I did that wrong. There, we correct that. So we have a diminished power chord. Now when we start looking at 2-5-1s, here's what's great. If I look at A minor 7, let's say I'm in the key of G, so I'm going to have my 1 chord, 2 chord, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth to get through the rest of the scale. The 2 chord, in this case A minor, is a whole step up from the 1 chord, G major 7. So that means that regardless of whether I'm using the full voicings or not, they're always going to be in the same chord type because I'm going from a root bass to a root bass. So if I take A minor 7 here, and I want to resolve to G major 7, again, I can apply that rule of there's my root. Now I'm going to go down 1 fret and up a string to get my root bass power chord. So there's 2, and it's going to resolve to 1. Same thing here. If I want 2 chord, so there's my inverted power chord form, I should only have to move it down a half step in order to get G major 7. Now, you heard what I just did. What's going to happen is these 2 root bass power chords are simply going to pass through the dominant chord form, that tritone form. And if you notice, the top note of the root bass power chord simply resolves a half step, which gives me my dominant chord. And then the lower note will resolve a half step to give me my root bass 1 chord power chord. And so here in the inverted form, to get from here to half step down to the 1 chord, it will do the same exact move. But in this case, it's the lower string that's changing. Then the upper string changes second. So now the coolest thing about this is once you learn this move, whether it's from the inverted form or from the root form, That will never change. It doesn't matter what key I go to now. If I wanted to do it in the key of B flat major, there it is. Put the roots back in. I could do it in the key of C major, and I'm going to start from this form. Put the roots back in. Okay? The shapes don't change. It will always be that consistent. That's what's great about this process. I should also go to mention that when we put the roots back in with those guide tones, that's what we refer to frequently as shell voicings. So therefore, somebody just says, can you just play shell voicings? Now you know to play the root, third, and the seventh of the chord, which is what we just did there. But you notice it completes the story even without the root. Because you can hear the progression. All right? Now let's add some notes in the upper range, okay? So we're going to add on notes such as 9s, 11s, and 13s, or the 5th, but we're going to use the upper 2 strings, so now we're using string 1 and 2 to add to our 2 guide tones that's on our middle set of 3 and 4. And the thing that, there is something that you need to know about. There's 2 elements that you have to know in order to do this next step, which is, 1, you need to be able to play a major scale on a single string. So in this case, since we're working in the key of G major, and I'm going to continue to use A minor 7 as my example for this. And I'm only going to really do the minor chord just for the essence of time tonight. But what I need to be able to do, since I'm going to add the B string first, so the first process I do is called +1 method. So I'm just adding 1 note to the 2 existing notes that we already have. On the B string, which is the next adjacent string to our guide tones, I need to be able to play and understand where the notes of G major fall on that string. So if I were to play B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, and B, that gets me the 1 octave, and of course then it repeats after that. It's important because those are the notes that I have to choose from. The second thing I need to know is 9, 11, and 13 actually available? Because sometimes we have what's referred to as an avoid note. Now, without going into all the theory for that in this episode, 1, that information is definitely in the book, and you can find this information readily in a lot of different theory books and online in many cases. But I'm going to go ahead and give you the 2 general guidelines that I give students in order to identify what notes are available. So this might be a little hard to remember, but if you write it down and you just kind of maybe toy with it and go through the process, you'll probably understand. The first guideline that I give is that the note, the tension, okay, so we call them tensions or extensions because they do just that. They extend the chord and they create a sense of tension within the harmony. Tensions, typically 9 replaces 1, 11 replaces 3, and 13 replaces 5. So the tension must be a whole step above the tone that it's replacing. That's the first guideline. So for example, if I have C major and I want a 9, then D, if I'm in the C major scale, D is a whole step above C, so it's an available tension following the first guideline. The second guideline is a little more difficult, but the process is basically that the tension cannot create a tritone between itself and the 3rd of the chord and itself and the 7th of the chord. Because when it creates a tritone, which is that sound that we listened to a moment ago, that creates a bit of tension that has a need to be released. Like in a traditional classical cadence, you would have a move like that. It's T-do kind of thing. With the lower note. And you don't want to create a dissonant tritone or because it sets up another dominant chord, so it can be confusing to the listener, okay? So that's why those 2 rules are in place. If it breaks one or the other, it doesn't matter if it breaks one of them, don't even bother looking at the second one because you don't need to. So that's for the tensions. But now that you can look at a single scale on a single string, Then we can kind of put a couple more guidelines in place that I use in my particular method in the book, which is what I call caps. So now I may have that scale. I don't need to repeat. I don't need to double, I should say, the third and the seventh of the chord. So I've already got the notes G and C for my A minor, so I don't need them again. So I'm going to place caps on that string, what I call caps. And what I mean is I'm going to find C and G on the B string now. In this case, here's C at the first fret, and here's G at the 8th fret. And I don't need those notes. So now the only thing I have are the 3 notes of the scale in between those 2 notes. And they're, as long as they are available as tensions, then I can use them in addition to my guide tones. Now, I will go ahead and tell you that the 2 chord can accept tensions 9 and 11. A 13 is typically an avoid note, okay? And I know there may be some out there that say, well, I use 13 on that chord and it sounds really great. And so do I sometimes. But technically, in a theoretical aspect, it's an avoid note because it does break one of the rules that or guidelines that I gave a moment ago. So when I look at what's left in between C and G, I have the notes D, E, and F sharp. So D would be a 4th away from A, which would make it the 11th. E would be the 5th. F sharp would be the 13th or the 6th. And so based off of the fact that I told you the 9 and 11 is available, F sharp is not available. So that leaves me with 2 options for this voicing. I can have my guide tones and the 11th or the 5th of the chord. So that's going to give me A minor 11 or A minor 7, the voicing that we already know. Okay, now for the last process that I'm going to demonstrate in this episode. Remember, I told you that this process is heavily reliant upon power chords and pentatonic scales. I didn't really get into the pentatonic explanation yet, but that is in the book. And if you read that, it will make a lot of sense as to why. But I'm going to talk about the next part, which is I'm going to stack 2 power chords. I've already got my guide tone power chord. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those 2 notes, in this case D and E, that we found when we added the +1 method, and I'm going to take each of those 2 notes and I'm going to turn them into power chords. And as long as the notes are available as tensions, which right now you should remember we're leaving out the possibility of the note F sharp, then I can add those to the color. So I've already got D, and if I look at making D a power chord with the first string now, I have 2 options. I have G5 and D5. So both of those notes are available. Even though I've already got G down here, it doesn't add a lot, but I could play it. So I could play that G5, or I could play D5. So it still makes this some type of minor 11 chord because the D is still involved, so the 11th is there. I could look at the note E, and I could have an A5 or E5. So when I do that, I get our typical A minor 7, or I get A minor 9. This is what I think is so cool about this process myself. I sit around and think about this. Oh, this is so great. No, I don't really do that. But I do think it's great, and I try to point this out to students frequently. That now, after going through all that process of finding the guide tones, doing the +1 method, and now adding power chords, check this out. I've got 7 different chord options for A minor 7 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 voicings. Now, if I wanted to make the argument that I don't need the G doubled, then yeah, I'm down to 6. 6, 7, whatever. That's a lot of options for that one chord with a very simple method that I may not have had available to me before to understand. Just like I did with this power chord in the inverted form, I could do the same process with the root position power chord. If I came up to this and to this position and I put the caps on just like I did before with C and G, then I can find G at the 8th fret, C at the 13th fret, and if you'll notice, I only have 2 notes in between, A and B, which is the root and the 9th. So I combine those back with that root position power chord. I get A minor 7, A minor 7, and A minor 9. Then again, I can take those 2 notes and put them into power chords as long as the notes are available as tensions. So remember, we're avoiding F sharp. So I could take A and make a D5 and an A5 chord. So I could put that together. There's an A minor 11, and there's A minor 7. I could take B and make an E5, but I cannot use a B5, even though that note's in the scale, and it would make a perfectly legitimate power chord because F sharp is an avoid note. So I really only get the 1 power chord there, which now makes it, again, an A minor 9. It just adds the 5th back into the chord. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options. So between the 2 original guide tone power chord forms, I have a total of 7 plus 6 voicings to give me 13, or at least 6 if you throw out the one with the additional G, 6 plus 6 to give me 12 different options for A minor 7 just based off of that. Now when you start looking at sheer numbers of this is where it kind of gets a little out of hand, but it's a really cool thing to consider. I only did it from these positions with the guide tones here, but every chord has its own inversion, and so each of these voicings that I gave you, especially those that have 4 notes, there's going to be 3 other options. So this chord has 3 different options because there's 4 notes involved. But the simple thing is I take this set of guide tones, move them up an octave, and then I do everything underneath it. Then I would take this root form, move it up an octave, and do the same process underneath it. When you do so, at a minimum, you've got 6 voicings in each position. So 6 times 4, that's 24 voicings that you have just by using this process that I've demonstrated in today's episode. Here's where it really gets crazy. I mean, 24 voicings, that's a lot, and it's a real simple process. Many of them could be looked at as double because I get a lot of different A minor 11s, but each one has a different kind of color because of the way they're stacked. But here's what I will say. Even though I'm not going to go into the great depths of this, there are 8 different roots that I could place under this to be different chords. Here's just a very simple example. A minor 7 has a relative major, which is C major. So that means if I've got 24 different voicings for A minor 7, that means I also have 24 different voicings for C major 7. That's a total of 48 voicings I'm getting just from the arrangement that I did today. F major also has that option because A minor is the 3rd of F, and there's various ways that we can use that as a substitution for an F chord. And so if I do that, again, throwing out certain chords, possibly if needed, or at least making certain conditions amendable, I guess that's one way of saying it, isn't it? I'll have another 24 voicings for that. So, I mean, we're already getting up into very large numbers. Like I said, there's 8 different roots I can place under here, and I will have a variations, and you get up into these numbers of 120 some chords. That's a lot of chords for very simple fingerings. Even if you just went from the first 6 I did, if you multiply those 6 times 8, those 6 voicings, that's right here in this position that I went over, that's 48 chords right off the top that you could learn to apply if you know the intervallic distance from the root. All right? That is a lot of information. So let me leave you with a few musical examples. And let me also preface this with, even though I use A minor 7 as my primary example throughout this episode, I could do the same
exact process for the +1 and or the double power chords in order to create extensions and upper structures on major sevenths and dominant sevenths. It's like, again, it's the same process. You place the caps on the next adjacent string, or you add power chords based off of the notes that you add from the next adjacent string in order to get a 4-note chord. So for like major sevens, like if I did G major 7, I'd still apply the caps and I'd still end up with just 2 notes, even if I was in this location. Either location, it doesn't matter. Dominant chords can be a little tricky because dominant chords have the option of non-altered extensions as well as altered extensions. So without going into detail, that's just another level to add. But once you do so, it's still just 2 notes of non-altered or 2 notes of altered. And these will never change regardless. Yeah, so it's just a really cool process. So the 2 examples I'll leave you is, one, I will use just guide tones like we discussed in the beginning for the A section of Autumn Leaves. For the second example, I will use the +1 method, and I'll make it a mixture of both of the notes that are available on the major and minor 7s. And for the altered dominants, I'll use a non-altered and some of the alterations involved as well. So enjoy.
So anyway, I encourage you to check this out. This is available on Amazon.com. You can also hit a link through my website at alanrobinsonmusic.com. And thanks for tuning in and checking out the show. I hope to keep bringing some information to you, and hopefully you're finding it useful. So for now, that's it. And now, go practice.